This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 64 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by Joe Davis, NFL on Fox, MLB on Fox, the voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and the voice of the World Series. Joe, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today, and especially this week, the week that the NFL kicks off, which I'm sure you're excited about, but also I would imagine your calendar and travel schedule is about to get a little bit more packed this week.
Yeah, good to be on, Brandon. It's a crazy time of year, bouncing back and forth for sure, but it beats working. There's no doubt about that.
Do you have any Thursday night baseball games on the schedule as well? So like, is it Thursday night baseball, Dodgers games, and then NFL as well?
Yeah, where it gets really crazy, I guess, is starting with this trip to Atlanta this weekend. So I'll have the Steelers Falcons game Sunday. Monday and Tuesday, Dodgers, Cubs in LA. Wednesday, we'll fly to New York. Thursday, Yankees, Red Sox. Head to Green Bay. Colts, Packers at Lambeau. Fly to Atlanta Sunday night. Dodgers, Braves Monday. Fly to Miami after that game. Dodgers, Marlins 3 days in a row there. Fly to New Orleans, Saints, Eagles, and then back home to remind my family what I look like for a day or two.
Yeah, like you said, it beats working. I'm sure you love the job and you recognize how hard it is to get this job, but you do have a family. So like, does that travel get daunting at times?
Yeah, I love the travel part of it. I love the challenge of prepping multiple games at a time. But you're right. I think the one drawback to it is the leaving part. Like the going is okay, but the leaving home it's the tough part of it. Thankfully, I got an awesome wife who understands and she makes it happen. She takes care of things when I'm gone and when I'm here.
You mentioned you have Steelers Falcons this week. So Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson. When do you get to Atlanta for that 1:00 game on Sunday?
Friday night. Yep. Zoom has changed stuff. You know, it used to be like before Zoom, I would have to travel. We'd have to be there Friday morning for in-person meetings. And to get there Friday morning, I have to leave Thursday night. So that's been a complete game changer for a little more maneuverability there as far as the schedule goes.
Yeah. And then this year now, working with Greg Olsen. I know you've worked with Greg before, but how does that dynamic change now that he's your full-time broadcast partner?
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. We did like a month of games together 2 or 3 years ago when Kevin would leave to host the World Series. And before I was doing the World Series, I would come over and fill in for Kevin for the month of October. And we hit it off, and we're similar life stages, I guess, with young kids at home and similar priorities and interests. And, I think how does it change when we're doing a game together every week? I think it can only be for the better. I think like even working with Moose these last few years, who I adore, it got better each week. And I think that's only natural. The only way to build that chemistry is to actually go out and do it.
Did you do any practice runs with Greg over the summer? Like, do you spend time together, or do you just both show up on Sunday and let it rip?
Yeah, more of that. We spent a little time together, but no formal stuff like I know Tom Brady and Kevin Burkhardt have talked about doing. We haven't done any of that. And I guess part of that is that we've had that, the real life experience of doing a handful of games together.
Yeah. What makes Greg great? Like, fans can be pretty picky when it comes to national broadcasters, but it seemed like the last 2 years, everybody nearly fell in love with him as a broadcaster, as an analyst.
I think the first thing is the energy. And it's the same thing that you get when you meet him in person. He's just got so much life to him. So I think no matter what he says, people are going to relate with that. But then you listen to what he says and the content is excellent. I think like you never want to be too much into this or that. You never want to be all stories. You never want to be all stats. It's like putting together a stew, right? You like a right amount of each ingredient. And he's got that knack where he studies the analytics and he can translate that stuff, but he also knows to pull it back a little bit, not turn it into math class. I think that especially for somebody who's only been doing it for a few years still, which is hard to remember because he's so good, so fast. He's got a great just sixth sense for how to balance all those different things.
What did you think of his ability to not only replace Troy Aikman, but to replace Aikman while Tom Brady was looming over that team?
Yeah, impossible situation, right? There's no blueprint for it. So the fact that he went out and performed the way he did, not a surprise knowing him. And then the way that he's handled it this last year, I think is pretty cool too. I know that Tom's talked about Greg's been a help to him. So that tells you a lot about him right there, that Greg's going to go out of his way to help the guy who's kind of coming and taking his spot. So yeah, I've admired him. Having worked with him, I admire him as a guy, and now seeing the way he's handled it, it's just enhanced that.
Do you feel at all like you're in any sort of competition with Tom and Kevin? And like, does ranking the booths, does that inherently create competition inside of a network?
I think you're lying if you say you don't try to be the best crew there is. I don't know that we look at it as, or I'm just speaking for myself, I don't look at it as like me against Kevin. Kevin's one of my best friends, or even our crew against their crew. But yeah, we talk about let's go be the best crew in the NFL, right? Like I think that should be the goal for every crew. And anybody who tells you, no, we're all competitive people, especially these guys that have made a living out of being competitors.
Right.
Yeah, we try to be the best that we can be, but that's not necessarily like, hey, let's go be better than the one crew or whatever.
Yeah. Have you gotten to hear any of Tom and Kevin's dry runs at all?
I have not. No. You got any back channels there where you've gotten some tape?
No audio leak.
Okay.
Have you spoken to Kevin about that dynamic?
Yeah, and got to meet Tom at, I haven't covered him, have met him.
Sure.
Spent some time with him at our football seminar this summer, and everybody raves about how, first of all, like how much he wants to be there. I think if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how good a communicator you are. If you're not wanting to be there and wanting to put in the time, you're probably not going to be very good at it. So there's the want to, and then sounds like he's gotten better and better each time, and they've done quite a few of those. So I think that they've stacked up enough reps doing games behind the scenes where they feel like they're in a good place going into this first game. But I think everybody's excited to hear what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Zoom meetings before a game. A lot has been made in the last couple of weeks about the NFL restrictions being placed on Tom because of the his pending Raiders ownership bid. And I won't ask you about, you don't have to comment on Tom's situation directly, but just for your preparation as a play-by-play voice, how important are those meetings? How important is getting to meet with players and coaches before the game?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think to get your crew kind of headed in the same direction, what you're going to be focusing on, because you can definitely get the sense, like these NFL teams are covered so well that you can get that sense if you don't hone in on certain things that you're sitting at a messy desk when you go do a game. There's just so much stuff. So it proves to be, I think, a good chance for your crew all to kind of sift through and prioritize through all that information, find out what's important. Some meetings are going to be better than others. Some coaches don't give you anything. Some coaches give you too much, and you got to figure out what you can use and what you can't. But yeah, they're definitely important. Again, some weeks more important than others, but definitely an important part of the job.
Is it the type of thing that, like, if Greg couldn't attend those meetings, that you or a producer would be able to fill him in on that stuff? Or is it, just more important for everyone to be in the room together?
I think you'd prefer to be in the room together. I think that in a perfect world, Zoom never happened and you're still there in person. I think the more intimate it can be, the better. But yeah, there's ways to do it. I mean, I've missed conference calls before. Greg's missed conference calls before. There's stuff that pops up occasionally where you do have to have the crew fill you in and have somebody that's taking good notes. And I think the important thing is to just, if that's the case, then you got to be able to kind of revisit the meeting and sit down. And like I talked about, making sure, or the meeting's getting everybody on the same page. It just kind of, I would think that for those guys, in any case where we've missed a meeting, it just takes another level of sitting down and making sure that the person that missed the meeting is filled in on everything.
Is it ever an option to do those in person now?
Mm-hmm. And we still occasionally do. I just think that it's probably more often than not, guys do them in Zoom. And I think the coaches probably prefer that too, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's not the highlight of their week to sit down and meet with us. So whatever's convenient for them too.
How clued in were you to all the moving parts at Fox a couple years ago? Because like especially with Fox letting Joe Buck out of his deal early, did they check with you first, like to make sure that you were still planning to stick around and wanting to move up in the ranks in football and baseball as well?
They didn't check with me first. It was something where I was not sleeping great, right? The news comes out that Joe might be leaving, and I'm thinking, well, if he somehow does, I think I might be in line to be the guy for the World Series. I don't know for sure though. And then I was like every single day sitting there like a madman, just refreshing my phone and all the news feeds and everything, trying to see what the next update was. But no, they didn't fill me in. As we got closer to figuring out exactly what was going on, I got a better idea that I would probably get a chance to do the World Series if it did happen. And then right towards the end of the whole thing, I was in Las Vegas doing the Pac-12 basketball tournament, and Brad Zager, one of our bosses, called and said, "Hey, I'm going to come see you in Vegas tomorrow if you've got some time for me." And that's when I kind of knew that it for sure was going to happen. But it was a nail-biting few weeks, that's for sure.
Were you surprised when Joe left?
Yeah. I think any time that somebody leaves a network like that in an A chair, it's surprising because, guys stay in those roles forever. I think you just kind of assume Joe Buck and Fox and Joe Buck, that's always going to be the case. So, I still remember where I was when I got word that something had come out that there was a chance that he was going to leave. That's a jarring thing because it's just you kind of think things are going to stay the same as they've always been in situations like that.
And at that point, like, do you have your agent contact anybody at Fox, or do you get in touch with anyone, or you just kind of sit back and wait for them to come to you?
Yeah, we just sat back. I think it was a situation where, like, what is the agent going to say? Right. If they were to call and say, "Hey, we heard this report, Joe's going to leave. Want you to know, Joe would love to replace him on the world." Obviously, so I think like they knew that I would want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And any case that needed to be made, hopefully in a situation like that, you've made the case with your work. And in that case, I'd been at Fox for, I think, 7 or 8, 9 years at that point. So that's what has also made it hard though, because you couldn't really do anything. Like you wanted to, of course, pick the phone up and call, be like, "Please pick me, please do," but you just kind of had to wait for it to all shake out.
You worked with Troy on some NFL games, correct? How was that? How is Troy off camera? Is he welcoming? Is he all business?
Yeah.
How is he to you in the booth?
He was so great to me. I only did one game with him.
Okay.
Ironically, I guess it was a Tom Brady game. It was Bucks and Saints.
Right.
And he was so great to me. Let's see, it was in New Orleans, and I don't know, just the one game, so I don't have a ton for you on that, but just the way that he made me feel comfortable, and what was a big deal for me, getting to do the A Crew game there before I had done much of any NFL at that point, and was still trying to prove myself as worthy of a spot like that. And he went out of his way to make sure that I felt comfortable, I think is the best way that I could put it off the air.
Is it hard to do just a one-off with somebody when you're so used to working with somebody for a season, and especially from Troy's standpoint, where he was so used to working with Joe for, I mean, obviously he has people fill in on occasion, but for the most part, like, Joe is the only person that he's really used to working with. And here is somebody new stepping in and just trying to pick your spots. And maybe it's even harder for an analyst than it is for a play-by-play voice. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Who that would be harder on? I think it's as hard or it's not as easy as when you're working with somebody every week. Back to what we were talking about, working with Greg every week. I think it's only going to make it better, just because every time you do it, you learn a little more about each other's cadence and timing and rhythm and everything. So there's no real substitute for getting those reps. But I think within reason, you can make it as hard or as easy as you want to, based on how you treat the guy who's coming in to fill that seat. And again, Troy treated me so great. It was as easy as a situation like that can be.
How did you land at Fox? going, especially, was it 2-3 years before you're working with the Montgomery Biscuits?
Yeah.
Like that's quite the jump to then be getting national work just a couple of years later.
Yeah, it was. I was in Montgomery 2010 to 12, and from there went to ESPNU. So I did 2 years at ESPNU, mostly lower level college stuff. Got some few bigger opportunities there, but 2014, there was the early days of FS1, so it was at a stage where they had a little more inventory, and it became a no-brainer for me, where it was a chance to go be, at that point, the number 2 college football guy, get a chance to do consistent Major League Baseball. I'd only done a couple Major League Baseball games at that point, kind of backwards from where normally a guy would work with a team and then get the national gig. I had done a handful of ESPN radio games, Major League Baseball, and that was it on TV for Major League Baseball. Fox hires me to do it every week, and then the Dodger job actually came a couple of years after Fox gave me that chance.
Right. Similarly, going from the Montgomery Biscuits to being in line to replace Vin Scully, like that's probably even the more impressive jump at that point.
Yeah, man, I still don't know how. Like, I'm being honest. I pinch myself all the time thinking about like how in the world this happened. So many right time, right place things that happen, and yeah, you got to put the work in. You got to not stink at it. But I've had so many people help me. I've had so many things fall my way that like, it's not lost on me how crazy this is, that I got to do what I did following Vin and at the age that I did, and now following Joe. Like, yeah, it's stupid.
Yeah, and I mean, not to imply that you didn't put the work in, because you did. You've lived through the grind, and I mean, now you're still living through the grind, just at a much different stage. But like you think of the time that Wayne Randazzo had to put in the minor leagues, and then hosting pre and post game shows in Chicago and New York, and then before getting to the Angels. And like, I would consider Wayne's rise rather quick as well.
Yeah.
But just, 2 or 3 years from the Montgomery Biscuits to replacing Vin Scully, that's a different level of rise.
Yeah, it sure was, man. I think when the Dodgers first, and by the way, Wayne is one of my best friends. I don't know if you know, Wayne and I were in each.
Yep.
And I think he's one of the best guys out there doing it. When the Dodgers first called, I had done 4 Major League Baseball games total. Like, I had done a couple on ESPN radio. I got into Fox at the end of 14, and I did 2 FS1 baseball games before that college football season. And the Dodgers first reached out like that fall. So at the time it was like, what? Like, they even know who I am? What the hell is that? Like, no, there's no way. So it's a great one of those examples of like just crazy luck. And again, like, yeah, I worked hard at it, but I didn't work nearly as hard for as long as a lot of the guys that are just as good and a hell of a lot better than I am. And there are guys that are so good and so deserving that still haven't gotten those chances, that are grinding away in the minor leagues 20 years later. So yeah, you got to be good at it, but you have to have stuff time out in your favor. And I continually just luck out. Like, I've been so lucky. I joke with people, but I seriously, like, I got to look both ways several times before I cross the street, because I'm due to get drilled by a bus or something. Stuff has come my way.
So did the Dodgers reached out to you before you reached out to them?
Yeah, because it was a really unconventional job opening, I guess, to state the obvious, with it being, not knowing exactly when Vin was going to step away. And then, so there was never really an opening.
Right.
When they reached out, it was like, hey, we're starting to think about what life will be like after Vin is done. And, your name came up. And I remember my agent said, do you have a baseball reel? And I was like, no, not really. I can put one together for you. But so they reached out. And then when I was in LA for some Fox meetings that winter, I said, you know what, I'm going to swing by Dodger Stadium, introduce myself to the people that are doing this process, and just kind of see what's going on. Lon Rosen, who headed the whole job search, said, you're one of 4 people we're considering at this point. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know how that happened, but this is kind of real. So I called my wife afterwards and I said, hey, like, I'm still not going to get this, but can you believe I'm one of 4 people they're considering. Well, years before, when we were in college, I told her, hey, you're not going to believe this, but I'm one of like 10 people the Biscuits are considering for the Montgomery job. And her response was, oh my God, we're moving to Alabama. So she was right that time. And when I told her, nothing's going to come of this, but the Dodgers are actually considering me, she said, oh my gosh, it's happening again. Like, you're going to get this, aren't you? And it just worked out where the other few guys that they were talking to, for one reason or another, it didn't make sense. And I think they wanted somebody who wasn't, like, it almost worked in my favor that I didn't have a ton of experience, and I didn't, like, there wasn't an identity wrapped up in another team or even in a network really at that point. I was doing low enough level stuff where I could kind of still be their guy, and as different from Vin as you could have, just given the age difference. And they took a chance on me, and Lon Rosen was the guy that headed that whole thing.
Do you know what it was they heard, or when they first heard you, that made them start to consider you for that job? Did you ever ask that?
I've heard a few different stories as far as like who was the first one to turn on my tape or to point to my name. I know that there's a producer that I'd worked with on some ESPN streaming stuff, like college baseball, College World Series tournament, regionals or super regionals that I'd done just some real entry level stuff with years before that. A guy that he knew that worked at Sportsnet LA, and Brad Zager might have had something to do with it too, even before I was on Fox's radar, or I was already at Fox, so Brad knew about it through, like, it's all like everybody out here in LA, I guess, kind of a fishbowl of these executives, and I don't know who brought my name up first, but I just know that I lucked out that somebody did.
Yeah, really cool. Do you know whether Vin Scully had a say in you being hired? Did you meet with him prior to getting hired?
I didn't meet with him before. I don't know that from what I understand, they showed him my tape, but he was at a point where, and I think it was always the case, where he was kind of hands off when it came to stuff like that. I think that he was so, especially that last year or two. I mean, there's always somebody that wanted his attention for something. Yeah. And I think that it was more just, if you think this is the guy, sounds good to me. And he was pretty removed at that point, as you would expect a guy to be. He was in his early 90s, done 67 years of it. And but I will say this, one of the first calls I got when it became official was from Vin to welcome me to the team and congratulate me. And I got to know him a little bit that first year, where he was doing home games and I was doing road games, but not a ton of crossover just because of the schedule differences.
Sure. Did you did he ever give you any pieces of advice or anything like that?
Yeah, the big thing, and it sounds obvious, but it's be yourself. And he said it's the same advice that Red Barber gave him in 1950 when he took over next to Red in the Brooklyn Dodger booth. And it seems obvious, like, yeah, okay, be yourself, of course. But I think that the human nature is to try and mimic people who you like, and especially in this situation, maybe to try and be the guy who you're trying to follow.
Right.
So his idea was just let yourself come through, and I've reminded myself of that all the time. And I think that it's huge advice, and it sounds simple, but at least I have to remind myself, just given what I mentioned about trying to emulate other guys. And then the other thing is, we talked about, I wanted to know from him the biggest situations, because the biggest calls, that's what's going to separate the greatest ever to do it from the really good ones. And I wanted to know what his process was, because nobody's better than him in those moments. And the way he put it was, think of it like if your house is burning down and you're in there and you got to get everybody out safely. If you're breathing heavy and you're hyperventilating and going crazy, you're probably not getting everybody out of that house safely. But if you were calm and measured and taking a deep breath, everybody's going to be just fine. And he said, think of the big moments that same way. Take a breath, breathe your way through it, and you're going to be just fine.
Yeah, it's a unique way of putting it.
Yeah, for sure.
Was it hard to win Dodgers fans over? Like, obviously you're not Vin Scully. They're aware of that from the start, but also you're not from Los Angeles and you didn't grow up a Dodgers fan either. So, like, was that something that they ever held against you?
I couldn't tell you, I can't speak for all of them. What I'll say is Vin's advice was huge. Be yourself. And so I tried to let myself be myself. And then two huge things. One is the team has won a ton since I've gotten here. So I've delivered good news. I think if I
Yeah.
was delivering crappy news, they would have run me out of town. Like, it doesn't matter who the guy is. You're delivering bad news, they're not going to like you. And then Oral Hershiser is such a great partner. And from my first day here, put his arm around me, literally, figuratively. Like, he just been such an incredible person in my life that has everything I have said since I got here, whether it was right or wrong or stupid, he still rubber stamps it with the way he replies and the way that he segues off of it. So between the team winning games and Oral being such a good partner, I think that, in time they at least learned to accept me. And that's as much as I ever could ask for, being the guy following Vin.
Did following Vin help prepare you for replacing Joe Buck at all?
Probably. Yeah, I can't say that I thought about it necessarily, but I think just the same ideas apply, where it's like, be yourself and trust yourself, and trust that over time people can hopefully come to appreciate who you are and what you bring. And I think another situation where it's good to not get too caught up in who you're following and trying to be that person, trying to, like, of course, I learned from both those guys as much as I learned from anybody, but without losing yourself in the process. And to be able to go through that a couple times definitely didn't hurt.
Did you feel more pressure replacing one than the other? Probably
Vin. And I would tell Joe that, I think Joe's become a great mentor to me. And he would say, yeah, I'm sure he'd say, I'd kick you in the ass if you said that I was hard to replace than Vin. So I think that, Vin, the greatest ever to do the job. I think Joe's the greatest of our generation. And, to be able to follow those two guys, and I have to use the word follow because the word replace, and I know it's semantics, but like, you really don't replace guys like that. Vin, who's the greatest ever to do it, 67 years on the job. Joe, quarter century doing World Series. You're not going to replace that. But to be the guy to follow them, I try to channel it like a responsibility more than this pressure-packed situation. And that made me channel it like with this feeling of gratitude and like good fortune that I get to be the guy, to follow those guys, as opposed to, oh boy, I'm replacing Joe or I'm replacing Ben.
I think also the following the local broadcaster is harder than the national. And national is the bigger stage, but baseball, especially, fans have such a strong connection to their local broadcasters. And like, while Joe Buck is great and he has a lot of fans, but that connection with national broadcasters just isn't quite the same.
Yeah, you're so right. And I can't tell you how many people I hear from that say, I listened to Vin from like in the womb. I was listening to Vin, and Vin was a part of so many people's lives, and like through generations. He was something that connected kids to their dads, to their grandparents, to their great grandparents. And you're right. Yeah, so I think you nailed it. Something that I wasn't even necessarily thinking about when I first answered your question there. That just the way that you. Because it's every day too in baseball, you're in these people's houses every single day. And people felt like they lost a family member when Vin retired and then when Vin passed. So that adds a whole nother layer of emotions and nuance to following somebody in that position, I guess, than, to your point, the national role, where you're not attached to any one of the teams. You're more attached to the event in the moment, which I don't think is nearly as emotional as the team.
You mentioned Joe Buck being a mentor. Was that more while he was at Fox? Has it continued since he's left and been at ESPN?
Yeah, it has continued. It's that's one of the coolest things that's happened in my career. Is I grew up wanting to be Joe, basically, right? Like watching the World Series, watching the Super Bowl, all the events, all the biggest events that I remember from my childhood, it's pretty much Joe that was calling those. So I went from, I want to do this job and I want to do those games that he's doing. I want to do it just like him, to going to Fox. And one of the highlights of my first big football seminar was I got to meet him for the first time. So I go from idolizing the guy to getting to meet him, to him becoming a mentor in those next few years, to now I consider him a friend. And it's like I lean on him for all kinds of stuff. It's more just like, the personal stuff and the stuff off of the air that he's become. So that's another one of those. See, I'm not kidding when I say, like, I pinch myself all the time. There's so much crazy stuff that I've had just kind of luck into and line up for me. And that's one of the big ones, is my relationship with Joe.
What's the best advice that he gave you, or something that stands out?
Man, I think to trust myself. I think that, like, with Vin, it was be yourself. With Joe, it probably distills down more to trust yourself, trust that you belong, that you can do the job. And, he's talked a lot through the years about criticism that he's dealt with and how he's managed it. And I think that he's taken the stuff that he's learned, the wisdom he's gained from going through that, and passed it on to me. And I think it comes with the chair, right? You're going to have people that don't like you. And, like, I think of that, like, I put myself in the position of the fans, like, why would you not like an announcer or whatever? But then I think about music. Some people are going to say, for example, Drake is awesome. Some people are going to say he's terrible. And, like, it's because it's subjective. And it's the same thing with announcers,
Sure.
right? It's not a personal thing.
Right.
That's not something Joe has told me. That's an aside that I've just kind of thought to myself. But that idea of just not being too hard on yourself, trusting that you know what you're doing, continuing to do what's gotten you to this point. But man, I could go on and on the stuff that Joe has passed on to me, and that a lot of it is too just stuff that I think of that's on my mind, that I know I can go to him, and he's somebody who's lived a lot of the questions that I have, and always has time for me.
Joe gave up the Cardinals job. I think it was about halfway through his tenure at Fox.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see yourself doing the Dodgers job long term? Like, you've been there a while, but is being the voice of the Dodgers something you want to hold on to, or is that the job that might be the odd one out if the travel gets to be too much at some point?
I don't see it going anywhere. Assuming that they'll continue to have me. So this is my 9th year, which is blown by. We love Los Angeles. My wife loves it here. There've been situations where potential opportunities to go back to the Midwest, where we're both from, and anytime that comes up, she immediately is like, "No, we're not leaving here. Like, the weather's too nice out. It's too great here. We this is kind of home now. We have 3 kids who are in school here, and we really feel at home here. As far as the schedule goes, they've been, like, the Dodgers and Fox and my bosses there have been so great to me. And it goes back to that fishbowl thing I was talking about. They all know each other. So I've been so lucky that they've worked nicely and allowed me to coordinate the schedule. So as the Fox role increased a little bit, I was able to pull back the number of Dodger games I do. If I couldn't do that, then maybe it's a different story. But I'm at a point now where my Dodger schedule the number is low enough where I do get some time at home, where I don't feel like I need to completely cut something out. And I love doing it. And I think it's something that if you ask my wife, she'd say, you're going to do that job forever. So, and I don't know if you go ask the bosses if they're going to say that, but she would say that she thinks that that's something I'm never going to give up. And she's probably right.
How many Dodgers games? Was it 90? How many did you do?
Yeah, I'm at 90.
90. You're from Michigan, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The Tigers broadcast, I think it's in great hands now with Jason Benetti, but were you ever approached about the Tigers job? Because they've gone through a couple of transformations over the years since you've been in LA.
Yeah, nothing formal, but there have been conversations before that have happened. I think just naturally, anytime you have somebody who's working in the industry, in baseball specifically, from an area like you mentioned, was the resistance when you took the Dodger job because you're not from LA? I think that's a great question, because part of being able to identify with the person calling the games is probably where they came from. So anytime that there have been opportunities that the Tigers thought they were going to have, there have been conversations, but that never really have gotten anywhere. Just again, back to how happy we are here in LA.
How much do you value getting to call the World Series? Just getting to be the voice,
Yeah.
of America's pastime in the biggest moments. How much do you value that?
Yeah, had you asked me as a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be a play-by-play announcer. If you had asked me to pick a game, one game you can call, I would tell you Game 7 of the World Series. I would have told you that as a 12-year-old. So when I say living my dream, like, it's not hyperbole. When I do those World Series games, that is exactly what I grew up wanting to do. So it's hard to put into words. Like, using the word special almost feels like underselling it. It's surreal for me that I get to do it, and I cherish every second of it, and will for every one of them I get to do.
Is getting to call a Super Bowl a goal?
It's not to the point where, like you said, like I said, had you asked me what game I want to do, I would have said Game 7 of the World Series. But yeah, I'd love to call a Super Bowl. I think that I'm not necessarily, like, if you ask, do you want to call the Olympics? I'm not trying to add stuff necessarily.
Yeah.
Stuff that I'm not doing, because of the family situation. I'm not trying to add games, but yeah, of course it'd be cool to call the Super Bowl one day. I will follow that very quickly by saying I hope Kevin Burkhardt does 100 of those, and Kevin should, because he's as good as anybody out there, and deserves to do it for as long as he wants.
Yeah, of course. But obviously, I mean, you've lived through it with being surprised by Joe Buck leaving. So, like, once that happens, it seems like anything is possible.
Sure.
How is getting to cover Shohei Ohtani on a regular basis?
Dude, it's something, man. Like, I actually was just texting with a buddy who is going to use my tickets this weekend, and he usually goes to several games a year and hasn't been yet. And I said, you got to go watch Shohei. And, like, I'm not just blowing smoke here. This is incredible. It's every single day. And, baseball people tend to get kind of like old man, yell at the cloud, lose perspective. It's impossible to lose appreciation for this. Every single day, I'm like, watching what this guy does. It's so cool. It is so cool. I can't believe we get to do it for 10 years. And he's only half of what he's going to be next year.
Right.
I know the stolen bases may go down because he's pitching, but this is only half of the full version of Ohtani. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah. You were there, obviously, for Ohtani versus Trout in the World Baseball Classic. How did the lure and the fame of Ohtani in the WBC, how does that compare to that of Ohtani in Major League Baseball?
I think that it would have been, had I done the games in Japan, the qualifiers, the lead up to the championship, probably would have been a better comparison, or like a fair comparison to him being in LA and what he's done for Dodger fans. And I will say that the WBC, that environment, and a lot of it centered around Ohtani, was spectacular. I went into the WBC thinking like, like kind of a nuisance in the calendar here, getting ready for opening day, and now we got to go do this event. It was awesome, and he had a huge part to do with that. You'll walk into Dodger Stadium, a franchise that has as much history as any, and you can run down a list of so many Hall of Famers and guys not in the Hall of Fame that everybody knows their name, and you can make a good case to wear their jersey into the stadium. You can walk into the jersey now and into the stadium now and see a wall of nothing but number 17 jerseys.
Yeah.
Just his impact, not just what he does for 9 innings that makes us drop our jaws and smile every single night, but his impact on the organization, one that to move the needle on, you're going to have to be something special. It's blown away, I think, even what I had anticipated. Now, you pay a guy $700 million. I think you're hoping that the needle moves in more ways than just down the field. But honestly, for me, I could not have fathomed what kind of impact he was going to have on the field, on the organization. And then I hope in the postseason, and this is speaking as the Fox guy more than the Dodger guy, I hope that all of America gets a chance to see him have a long run. So, like, how cool a story is that going to be when he gets to the postseason for the first time? And again, as the national guy, I hope that he can make a run so people can see him play deep into October.
Yeah, for sure. I mentioned that the Ohtani versus Trout call, which I think will live forever. do you have a favorite call that you've done, whether baseball or football? Is there something that stands out there?
Yeah, actually, I didn't like the Ohtani Trout one. Actually, I feel like I don't know. I didn't love it. I'd have to go back and listen to it and check my notes on it why I didn't like it, but it's not my favorite. Probably the Bryce Harper's NLCS winning home run.
Yeah, swing of his life.
Yeah, and I think that's as much as anything. It was just like I said, what I've always wanted to do is the big postseason baseball games, and that was like the moment. That's the moment that you dream of. Like I'm sure he grew up dreaming of being at the plate in that moment. I grew up dreaming of being in the booth for that moment. The swing that you're going to see for as long as people in this generation live, played back on highlights. To be in the chair and have that happen, that's what makes that my favorite call. Not necessarily anything I did, just what the whole moment meant to me.
Yeah, that I thought that call was tremendous, and I think for me personally as a fan, like I my nostalgia might always miss Joe Buck, just being that I grew up listening to him. But like when I heard that call, I was like, oh, okay, like Joe Davis is the voice of baseball, and I hope it's something that he holds on to that for a long time.
Thanks, Ben.
Since you mentioned that you didn't love the Trout Ohtani call, do you have a call, whether it's that one or another one, that you would like to have back?
I would like to do Ohtani's 40-40 Grand Slam again. It's another one where I don't know that I did anything wrong. I didn't mess it up.
Yeah.
I wish I would have said his name within the call, just for that historical soundbite. I think that it probably required his name. But I went back and listened to it probably 15, 20 times trying to figure out how I could have done it a little better. I like to get a notepad out and write down, and I've been doing this since I was in Montgomery, write down what I said, and I don't know if workshop is the word, but nitpick it and find where I could have gotten rid of words, how I could have timed certain things better. Again, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't call him by the wrong name or say the wrong thing that happened, but I would like to be able to do that one again.
Is there anyone you lean on that you send audio to and ask them for feedback?
Yeah. Early in my career, it was all the time. I was probably a nuisance to people, just asking for critiques all the time. And these days for baseball, like Dan Shulman has been a big help to me. Sent him some tape. Gary Cohen has listened for me. I bug Wayne a lot.
Yeah.
Adam Amin is another guy who I've grown up with, and he was in my wedding as well with Wayne, and bug him for critiques and ideas. And it's not as much like it used to be when we were in the minors. It would be listen to this half inning and really break it down and give me all this stuff to work on. And it's not as much that anymore as it is one of us will hear one thing or another that we point out. And it's like that one little tweak or that one little idea that can help you improve a little bit. So, and then I try to listen to myself too. Every couple of weeks, I'll go back. It used to be in Montgomery, I'd listen to every game before I had kids and had more time to do whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
But these days, I'll go back and listen every couple of weeks with a pad and a pen out and take down notes that I'll then physically take with me into the booth for, the next couple of weeks of games as reminders for things I want to work on. When it comes to NFL, I do listen to every game because you got a whole week between them. So I do the same thing where I'll take notes. The Steelers Falcons game, I'll watch back and be hard on myself and take notes, and I'll have those going into week 2 for Colts and Packers to hopefully improve a little bit.
Do you ever get to listen to one of those games? And I know you say you're hard on yourself, but do you get to say, oh, wow, that was a really good job?
Yeah. I mean, there's stuff I'll listen. Yeah. No, I'm not like, I do try to appreciate when I feel like I do something right. And that's part of it too, though, is like, you're never going to be perfect at this job. Yeah. And no matter how you do it, that's something I love about it. Like you can always get better at it. I'm just kind of wired that way to always try and look for little ways
Sure.
to learn and improve. And that's one of my favorite things about the job. So yeah, you celebrate the wins a little bit, but try and find ways to improve on the stuff you don't like.
Yeah, no, it's funny because like the majority of the people who are listening to you every week, they'll listen to it and they'll think you do a good job. So like you'd almost want yourself to be able to feel that way sometimes too.
Yeah, no, and I do.
Yeah.
I'm not a complete psycho.
Just as we finish up here, I want to compliment also your cooking videos. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, like when I was doing some of the prep for this, the ribeye, the pork shoulder, baby back ribs, rotisserie chicken, like everything looked well seasoned and nicely cooked. So if you ever find yourself with more free time, those cooking videos were great.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. We just moved a few months ago and love our new place, but we had an outdoor kitchen where we were, and the new place doesn't have one. So very soon we're going to be putting in the outdoor kitchen of my dreams, and maybe I'll bring back cooking videos.
Sounds good. Joe, you were great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man. It's good to talk to you.
That is Joe Davis. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.